This is the Cannabis and Banking session this morning. And before we begin, I just want to set the stage. My name is Gia Marone. I am the president of Women Grow. And Women Grow's mission is to connect, educate, empower, and inspire the next generation of women leaders, which means that we do not cultivate cannabis, we are cultivating our future leaders. That said, before I go into detail, I actually want to set the framework. But before doing that, I'm going to bring someone to the microphone, someone whom Dr. Shonda and I, who's on the panel, knows very well. And the reason why this session is so important is that banking for any business is instrumental. And so I thought, what better way to begin this session than to have someone who's actually in the space, a small operating business that's starting out in the industry, that's facing many of the challenges that we will be discussing this morning. So to start off, before I break into my introduction, I'd like to bring Hebra Bolton-Smith to the microphone.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, DC traffic is something else. I ran all the way here, so I'm still catching my breath. But I appreciate Gia and Dr. Shonda and the rest of the panelists yielding to me to just talk a little bit about some of the challenges I've faced as a non-plant touching business. So I own a company called Canna Health. We do medical cannabis certifications. We have 6 locations in Connecticut and are moving into the national realm. And my initial issue with banking came when I had this bright idea to start my LLC and call it the Cannabis Consultants of Connecticut. So I get my LLC, I got all my paperwork, I go to the bank, and they're like, whoa, that says cannabis, we can't have anything to do with it, we will not open an account for you. So I was like, okay, so I have to do this again. So I went back to the drawing table, decided to name my LLC The Healing Choice. So I figured I could stick it to them with THC in it, but not really, they wouldn't know it necessarily. So they signed a THC up for a bank account. And so I was able to obtain a bank account. And so I learned my first lesson that, I share with people all the time, make your entity something that is not necessarily affiliated with the plant because it creates all kinds of flags and it makes it difficult for you. Secondly, after my business was going and really successful and everything's moving, we're using Square because that was as far as I had gotten with taking payments. And all of a sudden, Square sends me a letter and says, and let me tell you, I was loving Square because at the time, we can't get traditional loans, so Square will give businesses loans sometimes based on their revenue. And so they had given me a couple of nice loans. It helped me get over the hump, and so I was paying it back, and they suddenly sent me this email and said, we're no longer gonna allow you to take payments because you violated section 3, 4, 5, and 6. So I go and I read 3, 4, 5, and 6, and I'm like, I'm not doing any of these things. And turns out that, of course, because of the fact that somebody wrote something about cannabis, they did some research, they cut my account off. So that disrupted my online services, that disrupted my ability to take payments, and it harmed my business for a little bit until we found another processor. So if we're able to get federal banking, it will help businesses like me who are already fighting to stay in the game and struggling to be on top to stay that way. So this conversation is very important, and thank you for your time.
So I thought that was a great opening to the discussion this morning. So as many of you know, cannabis is still federally illegal. It's still considered a Schedule I drug. Meanwhile, we have 33 medical states and 11 recreational states that are operating within the space. By the end of 2019, cannabis would have grown to, I'm sorry, I'm reading my notes because I want to make sure that I get the stats correct. 10.4 billion in consumer spending And it is projected that by the year 2025, we will reach about 26 billion. So what does that say for the federal level? So with that, we've got federal laws that are in place. Well, we're working towards that. I'm sorry, this morning I'm a little off, so I do apologize. So with that, we have federal laws and regulations governing financial services in the U.S. And so joining me this morning, we have our esteemed panelists. To my right here, we have, I'm sorry. No, I already, we have Gerald Oliver, and I'm sorry, Gerald Oliver is the senior analyst for Pura Vida Pro, an investment fund established in May 2019 to deploy capital in both the public and private opportunities across the cannabis space. And next to him, we have Dr. Shonda Macias, who is the owner and CEO of National Holistic Healing Center. She's also the president of Alera Holistic and the chairwoman and CEO of Women Grow. And next to Dr. Shonda, we have Amber Littlejohn. And Amber is the senior policy advisor for the Minority Cannabis Business Association. And on the other side of Amber, we have Charlie Bechtel. Did I pronounce that correctly, Charlie? Thank you. So Charlie is the CEO of Cresco Labs. He is one of the most respected CEOs in the commercial cannabis industry, and he has an amazing business. And so today, our panelists will really address what some of the banking issues are, where we're going with it, and I guess at this point, what we've all been discussing for the week in terms of how can minorities and women gain access to banking. That said, I'm going to begin the morning with Shonda, Dr. Shonda. So one of the questions that we have here is, from a perspective of women and minorities, what is the first win, I guess, for a big company of whom, here, let me reframe that, I'm sorry. From your perspective as a woman and a minority, what is the first win to be a big company in this industry?
It's interesting, Gia, that you say that, but let me put it in perspective. When I entered this industry back in 2012, can we have the microphone, please? It's not on. That's why I'm raising my voice. So, from the perspective that I start from back in 2012 when I started, I wrote my own application to have a medical marijuana business. I was able to get the Department of Health to issue a license to me. But the problem I had is that in order for me to have an application, I had to hold my location for 2 years before I was actually awarded. I went to the banks and I asked the banks, can you help me? I'm a small business and I need help with a loan so that I could actually hold the real estate necessary to be in this industry. And they told me no. I said, why? They said, well, the cannabis industry is an illegal industry and we do not participate in it. So I went to other private investors within the marijuana industry, outside of the marijuana industry, and yet and still no one would invest in my business. And still today, I think about that challenge. How many people are in this room right now that have a small business that isn't marijuana, that are denied day-to-day access for a loan to even get started in a regular business? So if you pivot to someone like me who's now in marijuana, and I'm a legal entity, and I can't get access to funding, you are shooting down my chance of having any type of entrance into this industry before I even get started. And so with that, I will say I had an amazing husband. When no one else invested into me, he said, Shonda, go for it. He allowed me to take a second mortgage on my home. We paid the rent for 2 years, and we had enough money to operationalize because we knew we had the resources, the knowledge, and the education to be able to operate. We just needed the opportunity. When we won, that same year, we lost our home. And that resonates within me because I am highly educated. I'm a PhD, 2-time Howard University graduate. I am from Rutgers University MBA, and I am probably 1% of our whole population that have access to this industry. And I had to give up my home knowing I have 4 children, and I just wanted a shot, an opportunity to be a part of this larger business. Now I stand today before you as a multi-state operator, but it did not come easy. And when you see people like Kibra and us in the audience that want an opportunity, and we want to be able to have access to funding, it starts now by changing the laws so we can have that. Otherwise, we will not have access and we will be shut down until that time comes.
Thank you. Thank you very
Sorry
much.
for the passion.
I don't think there's a need to apologize because it is a very passionate topic. And so I'll actually segue to Gerald. Coming from the institutional lending side, what perspective can you give us on how communities of color and women can have access to capital that could change in terms of the Banking Act?
Yeah, so can everybody hear me okay? All right, awesome. So I've been following this space for probably the last 18 months. I joined Pura Vida in May of this year, but prior to that I was at another fund where I covered cannabis. And I can speak from the perspective of all the companies that I meet and all the companies that I follow. I probably cover a universe of over 100 publicly traded companies. This is a booming business already. I think the stats, excellent. You heard the stats on how big this industry is already, and as far as the value concentration, it's concentrated in a very, very homogenous group of individuals that is, I think, white males, to be quite frank. Every single management team that I've met with, maybe the exception of 1 or 2, has been led by white males. And so just from that perspective, you can imply that it's incredibly difficult for members of the minority and women community to get access to financial services and banking. And then the next question is why? Why is that the case? And it's incredibly difficult, as Shonda pointed out, to get access to capital. The large multi-state operators that trade right now, the $3, $4, $5, $6 billion multi-state operators, had to be incredibly creative and had to have the resources to be able to access banking. They figured it out. And so they've gone through avenues that minorities don't necessarily have the wherewithal to access. And it's incredibly difficult for them to do that, to go public on a Canadian stock exchange, to figure out how to work with credit unions. All these things are incredibly difficult. So from that perspective, I think it's imperative that we move with a sense of urgency to get banking access and kind of normalize the playing field, because this industry is growing fast. By 2025, $26 billion of cannabis revenue. I mean, that's real. And the longer we wait, the harder it's going to be for folks within our communities to participate in that value creation. And so that's kind of what I would say on that piece.
Thank you. So this actually allows me to segue over to Amber. So Amber, knowing that, when I refer to MCBA, that's the Minority Business Cannabis Association. So we know that you've been on Capitol Hill. and that you have a position on the Safe Making Act. And if you can just give the crowd just a little bit of background of what that is, because I'm not sure if everyone here is aware. And then in addition to that, can you also talk about the impacts that would have on our community based on what you've been discussing on the Hill?
So MCBA, let me see if you guys can hear me, I'm pretty loud. Otherwise, MCBA's position is that we support, strongly support safe banking. We consider it inherently an equity bill because it addresses the #1 issue that is helping to create this gigantic ownership gap. So for us, inherently, we consider this an equity bill. Our members in our communities don't typically have access to the types of capital that are driving this industry, that multi-generational, intergenerational wealth, private equity money. So our members and minority entrepreneurs are struggling and going through, as Dr. Shonda highlighted, some extraordinary hardships just to try and participate in an industry that we should have access to, that was built on our very backs, yet now we are being shut out of it. So for us, we supported the bill wholeheartedly at its inception. And then during the process of development, it actually added a few provisions that will be helpful to us moving forward as we build out the legal framework. And that is a requirement for a study looking into diversity within the cannabis industry and equity within lending for the cannabis industry, and also annual reports back to Congress that will let Congress know how the banking industry is doing and how industry in general is doing. And this is really important data for us to be able to clearly illustrate what disparities look like. So for us, this is a critical first step. As much as we support and would like to see a comprehensive legalization bill, the political realities don't have that coming in time to provide relief for people that are trying to get into the business or are already operating and struggling. And by the time we get a legalization bill in place, our community will be further shut out. And these abysmal single-digit numbers that we see for participation will continue to decrease, as we are unfortunately seeing in other underrepresented populations in the cannabis industry. You asked about some of the unique challenges?
Yes, please.
So one of the greatest hurdles, again, I think Dr. Shonda really clearly illustrated this, is that it costs an extraordinary amount of money just to apply. We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars in application fees, let alone the states that require millions of dollars in cash and escrow. I don't know about you, but I think a good portion of our community doesn't have a few $1 million laying around. So that essentially shuts us out. And even in the states that have the most well-meaning, best constructed equity programs that are providing all of the other tools for minority operators without access to capital, all of those equity programs fall flat. They're moot. Because if you don't have the money to start and run a business, you can't do business. And then lastly, we just have the risk of this cash economy. We have our communities that are already existing with underfunded, higher crime areas, strained relationships with police. And so you have these operators, and especially disheartening when you have minority operators that are in the community trying to bring some money into the community, trying to uplift themselves in their communities, that become targets because folks know that there will be extraordinary amounts of cash there, that their employees are paid in cash, that their delivery people are paid in cash. And this is a further strain on our communities that are already strained. So for us, there are multiple angles why, and multiple reasons why we have strongly supported this. And then the last piece to this is it doesn't stop the fight. It in no way jeopardizes our ability to still be front and center in the legalization discussion. It doesn't it doesn't codify frameworks or provide an unfair advantage to other folks. In fact, it starts to give us a little bit more of an advantage. So for us, we've taken the position that we won't support any legislation that is comprehensive legalization legislation that does not include robust equity provisions. But safe banking is distinct from that, and this is a narrowly tailored bill that inherently focuses on an issue that is an equity issue.
Thank you. So that actually brings me to you, Charlie. I know recently that Cresco Labs introduced a corporate social responsibility policy, which I think is rather unique for the industry. And I'd love for you to talk about that. But also, in addition to that, how does the current lack of banking access for the cannabis industry impact Cresco's efforts to address many of the social wrongs that we've envisioned, that you have envisioned your organization can address in communities?
I'll speak loudly. So, thanks for having me here today. You know, I think what one of the things I bring to the panel here is the experience of being one of the larger multi-state operators in the space, and also a unique perspective that without question includes the importance of this being a socially conscious industry as it continues to develop. This industry has gone through several progressions, right? You're talking about first only an illicit market, second a fairly unregulated medical cannabis version that occurred, you know, in the Gen 1 states, primarily out west, followed by highly regulated compliance-focused medical cannabis programs, and now we have adult use programs. So the maturation of the industry itself sort of lays the groundwork for the future of it. By no means is this industry and the structure of it set in stone. This is an evolving, maturing industry that we're a part of. And as my colleagues up here said, this is a critical time right now to make sure that we get the pieces in place, the incremental steps that'll allow this to be the inclusive, diverse industry that it needs to be going forward. So with that, you know, a few months back, we announced really just the formalization of our internal community integration, community benefits focused objectives that we've always had as part of the foundation of Cresco. We call the program SEED. It's a social equity educational development plan. And what most don't realize is, and as I mentioned, the progression of the industry itself, it had gone through these several different versions of it. And when Gen 2 was created, which we call Gen 2, which is the highly regulated compliance-focused medical programs, Illinois was really, it's my home state, I'm from Chicago. Illinois created this idea of the merit-based application process with a limited license structure. For better or worse, there's things that are great about it, there's things that needed to be modified as reality came and as it unfolded in real life. But one of the things that it did is it made the applicants commit to certain things. They wanted to know how you were going to be a good neighbor, how you were going to be a good participant in the community in which you were going to operate. And so from the very beginning, the only cannabis that I knew, and as was mentioned in the intro, my background, I come from I'm an attorney by trade. I was focused in the banking space, specifically mortgage banking, and it really did inform the way that we thought about cannabis. I was part of an industry in mortgage banking that went from relatively unregulated to hyper-regulated overnight, right? When your industry is identified as the root cause of the world economic collapse, things change very quickly. And the organization that I was a part of adapted immediately and actually not only survived, but thrived in that post-regulated mortgage banking environment. So again, you had an industry that, this is my background, went from unregulated to hyper-regulated on a state-by-state basis. We were state-chartered, so Illinois was different than Wisconsin, was different than California, was different than New York, and also had a subject matter that had a tremendous amount of stigma associated with it, right? Getting a consumer base to trust you again, to get a loan with you, as we talked about, the country was decimated by the financial collapse, specifically with mortgages. So now you look at cannabis as an industry, unregulated to hyper-regulated overnight on a state-by-state basis with different regulatory frameworks across the country and a subject matter that had stigma. So when Illinois created this version of regulated cannabis, they really wanted to make sure that they tried to be as comprehensive as possible, which included social responsibilities. And so Cresco from the very beginning had this sort of community project focused approach to the cannabis space. As we now go from a medical program and a medical structure to adult use, it was very easy for us to understand, well, okay, when you're talking about medical, it's one thing, right? The focus there is just absolute consistency and quality in products so you can have that trusted medicine for patients involved in a program. The second you stop talking about epilepsy and you start talking about over the age of 21, you have a whole nother group of issues that you have to address, which is the social equity issue of this, which is the restorative justice component of, without question, a disparate impact on certain communities over the last 4, 5, 6 generations that has to be addressed as you transition from medical to adult use. So for us, and sorry for the long-winded way of saying, it was easy for us to understand we needed to do these certain things as a highly regulated medical cannabis company, but now as adult use is the future of this industry, we needed to address the specific issues that would be associated with having adult use available to anybody over the age of 21, and without question, again, that includes social responsibility, social equity. So, with our social equity plan, it includes restorative justice components. Expungement is a big issue. It has been mentioned already. The legacy of having arrests on your record and what that does to your ability to not only be a professional, but the impact it has on your family, the impact it's had on your communities has to be addressed immediately. The involvement, the education, access to funding, these are all things that are incorporated in our SEED program. As it been, and the topic of the panel here is banking. Capital in this industry is incredibly difficult to come by, and it only makes it more difficult if the only opportunities that are available are very, very large-scale commercial opportunities. So even the way that these states and the federal government are going to think about the unfolding of what adult-use cannabis looks like, there needs to be the creation of opportunities that are feasible, that are focused on small business. I can tell you right now, a large-scale cultivation operation, as it's been touched on already, you need to have $20 million to build out a 100,000 square foot facility, potentially one that you have to build from scratch. That's not a very viable opportunity for most. And honestly, even including my group, we grew into that. That would be a very daunting opportunity to be faced with, even if you were fortunate enough to win a license. So access to capital is a huge part of this. The good thing, and I'll pass it back to the moderator here, but the good thing is I know that the industry as it currently exists is very homogenized, as Jarrell said, but I could also tell you there are some very good actors that are large and that are successful at this point, that understand where this industry is going and are prepared to be part of the solution and help it get there. My experience in being part of the governor's transition team in Illinois, when Governor Pritzker took office, the contribution I was able to make to that team was to get them to understand that the industry is ready for this, for a more responsible development of an adult use law in that state. And that's why that focus, that sort of perspective of we can all work together to say yes to almost everything that every stakeholder sitting at this table wants, was the way that we were able to get that law passed legislatively, the only state in the country that has passed an adult use law through the legislature. So it's a very difficult process, but it's doable.
Thank you. So Shonda, I'm going to segue to you and then right after to Gerald. If the Safe Banking Act were available today, to what extent do you think our community would be ready for access opportunities?
So first and foremost, I can tell you from my personal background, I studied prostate cancer in the African American population to complete my dissertation work at Howard University. I looked how prostate cancer metastasized to bone, but I did it again in the African American population. Today, when you go to National Holistic to receive medicine for instances like cancer, my patients have problems because they cannot use their debit cards and they cannot use their credit cards or any other way to purchase medicine except through cash. Now, if you're from where I'm from, what that means to you is that usually around Wednesday, the day before your paycheck comes in, that your funds run out. You are living paycheck to paycheck, and during that period, you are living pretty scarcely. And so you cannot afford the medicine that is not subsidized at all, but yet you stay there in pain, and it creates a healthcare disparity from my perspective, because if you have your white counterpart who is a patient and has access to funds, this is not a problem. So they receive the medical treatment that they're looking for, where our community continues to experience these healthcare disparities. It's time for equality. It's time for us to have access. And healthcare, first and foremost, is the most important platform that I can bring to this message.
Thank you. So that pivots over to you, Gerald. Oftentimes in this industry, we're asked about investing. So because you have the background from the investment standpoint, how does this industry look from an investment perspective and the role of social justice and access to business in particular for minority communities?
Sure. So I'll answer the first part of the question. From an investment perspective, I think it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Again, I just recently joined this firm. I left a very cushy job at a large $36 billion hedge fund where I covered consumer packaged goods, which is a very mature industry. But the growth opportunity wasn't there. And so in the time that I spent studying and understanding the cannabis space, there was nothing like it. The growth trajectory, the businesses that were being created, the brands that were being built, visiting cultivation facilities, visiting dispensaries, it was a no-brainer decision for me from an investment perspective. And so with that being said, tying that to the social equity component, it makes it even more important that, and I'm being a little bit redundant here, but it makes it even more important that everybody has access to this opportunity. You know, I was lucky enough to be in a seat and have the network to be able to tap into to get an opportunity within this community, but I don't really interact with many people that look like me in this community. And so, and I would love for that to be the case, and I'm trying my best. From my perspective, I'm involved in a lot of organizations, some of which you guys may be familiar with: Sponsors for Educational Opportunity, Management and Leadership for Tomorrow, Inroads. These are all diversity organizations that have helped underrepresented communities and young men and women of color gain access to financial careers, investment banking, et cetera. And so I'm trying to do my best to make people more aware of the opportunities here, but we need banking and we need these types of legislations to get kind of pushed forward to be able to properly advise folks on how to kind of get access to this incredibly amazing opportunity that is the cannabis space.
Thank you. So Amber, I'm going to shift back to you because I know that minority, MCBA is a members organization. And given your membership, can you talk a little bit about, each of the speakers have really touched on issues that MCBA really goes out there to fight on behalf of, was not only fight on behalf of communities, but also help to educate. So with, let's just say, the Safe Banking Act, what are you teaching communities about that? Because we do want more people to get behind that. But in respect of getting behind it, they need to better understand it. So can we help our audience understand what are the driving points that they need to understand?
So one of the unfortunate misconceptions is created from a failure to distinguish between good incremental progress and bad incremental progress. So what has happened is there has developed a narrative that incremental is bad, comprehensive is the only way to go. Well, again, as we mentioned, our members don't have 2, 3, 5 years to wait for comprehensive legislation, and the political realities of Washington, D.C. don't have relief coming at the end of the year through comprehensive legalization, unfortunately. So MCBA, again, draws a very clear line. We consider bad incremental progress to be something that, for instance, would codify state frameworks that are broken, that are leaving people of color still being arrested at 4 times the rate of their Caucasian counterparts despite equal use, that leaves in place frameworks that are absolutely designed to shut out people of color and small businesses. So we're not supportive of legislation that would codify broken state frameworks. We are not supportive of comprehensive legislation that does not include robust equity provisions. So that means restorative justice, community reinvestment, and a strong focus on incentivizing equitable participation in the industry. And then on the other side of the spectrum, again, we see good incremental progress. That is something like safe banking or the small business legislation that we've seen, or even the insurance legislation. These are narrowly tailored bills that address issues that disproportionately impact our communities. Access to capital, again, is something that disproportionately impacts our communities. When it comes to insurance, risk tends to trickle down to the people that can least afford that risk, and that often is workers and people within communities of color. Small business has been since its inception, an extraordinary tool to help small businesses of color get started and to get the resources that right now people are charging. Consultants are charging these extraordinary rates that that really are prohibitive. So small business can do something as simple as draft a business plan, so that they can even take it to higher level consultants and have a concept to take to people. So for us, we think it's really important that people go forward with the message that there is good incremental and there is bad incremental. And because we are not going to see comprehensive legislation, we're frequently, as a community, told, okay, we're going to give you these idealized version, we're going to give you idealized legislation, focus on that, and don't focus on all of the other things that are going on around you. So for us, we are encouraging people within our community to focus on what is needed now, to continue working on what we need for comprehensive legislation, but to not lose sight of our needs now, because if the current situation continues, we will continue to be shut out. And if we wait for comprehensive legislation, we will effectively have been shut out. These frameworks and these financial situations will have codified, and we will be locked out. So again, as you hear this narrative, incremental is bad, comprehensive is the only way. I really encourage you to push back with, but we have people struggling now who need help now.
Does anyone else on the panel have anything to add to that? Do you agree, disagree? I figured I'd change it up a little bit.
I agree. I think from my point of view, when I entered the industry, I already knew there was less than 4% of minority ownership. But when I entered to find out I was the first African-American woman to have a medical license in the country, I was astonished. Like, are you serious? There's no one else in the entire United States that has been able to accomplish this. And so it's heartbreaking for me. And, day to day, I go into these circles and I do a lot of community outreach to ask people, please get involved, please participate. We need you here. We need you here because it's hard being by yourself.
I want to pivot back to Charlie, because I think that your company launching a social corporate responsibility policy isn't something that we typically see in the cannabis industry. Quite honestly, I believe it's the beginning of it. I do think it's inevitable, but it's the beginning of it. But for those that are coming from other industries, that's pretty common. But for cannabis, what do you envision overall in terms of Cresco's policy, and how can that help businesses? Because when you hear stories like Dr. Shanda's or Kibra's that are looking for, of course, access to capital, they're also looking for leadership and mentorship. You're a multi-state operator who can clearly offer that type of guidance and leadership. Can you talk a little bit more about your policy? Because I believe
Sure.
that really does go hand in hand in terms of with banking.
Yeah, and to touch on what was just said earlier too about good incremental and bad incremental. Again, as I mentioned, the maturation of this industry, even though to date it hasn't been structured in a way that was set up for success for a very broad, diverse, inclusive ownership group. These were the incremental steps, I think, in the last couple of years in particular. I think with the highly regulated compliance-focused component of it, it is what allows a broader support base to be created, to be having these discussions here today. So I think those are examples of, even optically it might come off as bad incremental progress, but I do think it laid the foundation upon which this very real and timely conversation is going to be happening about the future of the space. So with regard to seed, we really focus on a couple of issues in particular. And again, as I mentioned, while it's a fairly recent name associated with the initiatives, this just goes back to the community initiatives that we had to have as part of our applications to even win the merit-based licenses that we received. So it starts with that community integration plan. So wherever these locations that we have are the communities that they're in, we always have workforce development programs, we have hiring commitments, we have the internship programs with local community colleges. Again, and as the medical programs had started to progress over the years, they started to want to see a more social equity component, a more diversification. Pennsylvania in particular, I think, was at least one of the first states that we applied for where there was a minority component to it of they wanted you to commit to certain things with regard to hiring, and whether it was a race-based approach or veterans or women-based, they wanted to see that. They wanted to hold you accountable for it. There's an audit that's done on an annual basis. Like the components that can successfully be part of the way that the industry thinks about this going forward had started to be developed over the last couple of years. They just need to be broadened into the way that people are, the legislators are thinking about adult use. An incubator program, you brought up the being able to share the information. That's part of our seed initiative. We launched our incubator program in Illinois. I think before the end of the year, we'll have 5 groups on the dispensary side, 3 on the cultivation side, to make sure that, we thought about this from the perspective of how do we make the most successful program in Illinois. And a successful program to us is an inclusive program. It is a respected program. You can have the best intentions in the world, but if it's over-regulated or if it's not respected by the public's not going to participate in the program. So even if I just look at it through the lens of a business owner, I don't want to operate in a market that's not successful. I need it to be robust. I need it to be respected. I need people to want to participate in it. And I know that then I'll benefit from it, and we can compete and conduct business and do all the things that businesses are supposed to do. But you need that support for the program itself initially. So an incubation program is a big part of our seed initiative, and then also seed funding. In the way that we explain this to the legislators in Illinois, and why, again, we were able to thread the needle and get this passed legislatively, was by allowing the participants in the space, the incumbents and the new participants, to align their interests. Now you've got that successful program that's going to be built by me helping, by me incubating, by me providing seed funding, by me being able to help distribute products for these craft growers that are going to come online in Illinois through my distribution network, which touches every single retailer that's open in the state. Not only am I helping them be successful, but I'm helping myself be successful too, because we've aligned our interests. So, there's ways for this industry to develop in the right way when people just start thinking about the perspectives of all the stakeholders that are sitting at the table. And as I said, cannabis is a very unique industry. You have a very unique ability to say yes to almost everything that every stakeholder sitting at that table wants. You just have to be creative, and you have to think about it from the different perspectives.
Thank you. So Gerald, what do you think about companies that fare well with social corporate responsibility policies that are seen by investors with good profitability versus those that just have good profitability?
Sure.
And how can that impact?
Yeah, valuation.
Yes.
Yeah, sure. So I think I look at it from a couple different perspectives. And so one, there's a perception dynamic, right? When it comes to driving demand for your stock or your equity, consumers or investors want to invest in companies that are doing good for the most part. I mean, I come from another industry where you have pretty large scale social corporate responsibility programs from Coca-Cola and Pepsi and what have you, and that's just kind of the norm, like you mentioned before. And so I think that from an equity value perspective, the companies like Cresco, which is one of 4 large multi-state operators that have market caps that are greater than $1 to $2 billion, will fare very well when to investors that are thinking about where can I put my money, which company is thinking about how this industry is going to evolve over time. So there's that dynamic, and then there's a more direct impact, which I think Charlie was getting at, is as a company, you want to speak to your consumers.
Absolutely.
Right? And so you want to drive more consumers to your dispensary than the dispensary down the street. And so if I have a robust social corporate responsibility program like Seed with Charlie's business, the consumer will probably more likely transact with Charlie's dispensary than the dispensary down the street that isn't speaking to them. So Charlie's addressable market is a lot wider than the dispensary down the street. So those two perspectives, both the perception, which drives valuation, and the actual direct impact to the consumer, which just drives traffic and dollars into the system, will tend to lead to a greater equity value and greater valuation. So from my perspective, that is a criteria that I focus on for sure. Because in looking at both of those examples, I'm always going to go with the one that has good profits and has a robust social corporate responsibility program, and those two things are circular. Social corporate responsibility is going to drive better profits, I think, than a company that doesn't have it.
Gia, can I add something?
Sure.
So I have worked for Howard University for over 7 years. After I graduated, I went to Colgate-Palmolive Company, came back because of my calling, have $1 million in grants. But one thing that my tenure at the university brought to me is that there are raw talent, individuals, African American students that have the ability to accomplish the impossible. And sometimes that we don't recognize that raw talent because we're not around it to see those key indicators of what it takes to be successful. I've probably produced over 500 medical doctors in the field today. I've produced over 1,000 PhDs in the field today, and I've trained multiple advanced undergraduates. But the reason that I can say is that we take them through a pipeline of helping them mature their skill sets so they have the ability to accomplish what we want them to accomplish in the real world. It's not easy, but it's not measurable by what is their return on their investment. They don't have that portfolio with them. They don't have those numbers to indicate that they will be successful. But what they do have is the drive, and they have the passion. And it's time that we need to step back and not put a number to a person or someone's future, but think about their true talent and their gift that God has given them. So again, we need these incubator programs that will help them come and bring their true selves to fruition, because I know our talent is here. Our talent is here, and we still struggle because the systemic implications of racism is more of an institutional battle. We have to deconstruct one by one. But let's start now.
Thank you. Absolutely.
And again, as Jarrell mentioned, he has the ability to help guide where companies like mine are thinking about this issue too, because he's in a position working for the fund that he's in where that is a source of capital, right? And so likewise, I know my position that I'm in as a CEO of one of these organizations, and one of the things that I can do, right, is I can help influence the way that investors are thinking about this too, in the way that third-party service providers are thinking about this too. And so, I would say, earlier in the year, as this became more and more of an obvious path that needed to be addressed, when I'm in a different type of room where it's just full of investors at some of these investor conferences that I go to, I tell them straight out, I said, I wouldn't give $1 to a company that didn't have a social equity plan. And it's for a couple of reasons. Social equity is going to be a part of where this industry goes. If a company doesn't see that now, they're either ignorant to it, or they do see it and they don't care. And those are companies that I wouldn't put $1 into. And then
Charlie,
you have...
Can you say that one more time?
I know, 100%.
No, and I'm asking you to say
mean,
that slowly.
I don't know if anybody, in the room
back,
has,
right.
This is at ArcView conferences, this is at the Canaccord. I just got back from a Beacon conference yesterday in New York. I say this every time. Because again, it's just good business. Even if you're you're irrelevant or you can't absorb the social responsibility component of this, it's just good business. So as an investor sitting across from me, why would you put money into a company that doesn't understand where the industry is going? Or again, is actively turning a blind eye to it. So then the other thing that you do too is you demand that they demand of the companies that they invest in, that they develop these things, right? So again, knowing who I am and the role that I can play in this, I can't approach it from certain perspectives, right? Because I'm not part of the community that it's addressing. But I can approach it from my perspective, whereas the CEO of one of the largest companies in the space, and I can help plant that seed in the minds of the investors that are there to give this money out. Right? So this is more of my direct holistic route to this. I also tell them that, the third parties that we work with, expungement is a big part of what we're doing from the social equity component in the states that we're in. I will not work with a law firm, right? If all the law firms, and I'm talking about Sidley, I'm talking about Winston, Jenner, these are all law firms that I work with. Every one of them has to commit pro bono hours to our expungement fairs that we host, right? Because expungement sounds great on paper, right? It's one of these things. It's difficult though. It's costly. It's how do you make sure that people that are eligible for expungement even know that they're eligible for expungement? So there's an awareness component to it. So we will not work with law firms that don't contribute pro bono hours to these initiatives. But here's the good thing, and I always have to, I want to make sure that I mention this. All of them were absolutely willing and excited to do it. So when we put that initiative out there, every one of our law firms says, absolutely great idea, want to get on board with it. So, I can do what I can do also. It's not only just having the seed initiative, it's helping to push the investors, the third-party service providers in the right direction here too. And again, there's not going to be another law passed in the United States that's an adult use law that doesn't have a social equity focus. There won't be another one.
Thank you. I'm so glad he said that. Just because prior to joining the cannabis industry, I spent several years on Wall Street. And oftentimes when people are coming to this industry, they're asking, who should I invest with? Who should I put my money behind? And my question is, who do you want to put your money behind? Have you learned about these businesses? Do you know what types of programs are they offering? Because oftentimes we do have the power to really hold these companies accountable. And so what I commend you for creating a policy so early on in the game, because I know that when I came into this industry, that was one of the first things that I recognized, that we needed to have a social responsibility to the communities, especially that have been most impacted. And so in order for us to get ahead, we do need to understand if companies are not willing to invest in us, then why are we willing to support? It's good business.
Sorry. Well, here's the beauty of it, right? The laws are being created today. So you can not only, you don't need to just hope that the businesses will do it. You can make them do it.
Absolutely.
Legally from a regulatory structure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great.
And so at this point, there were some faces that I see in the crowd that joined us yesterday. Thank you for coming. I kept telling them about the cannabis and banking panel this morning. So what I'd like to do, I'd like to allow enough time for questions. So we have until, I will tell you, we've got until 10:45, and so I'd like to allow for enough questions before our panelists give their closing remarks. Now, I don't know if there is a microphone, but what should we do? Oh, there we go, over there. Okay. The gentleman here. With the blue shirt, right? Okay.
Good morning. I came late to the panel. Came very late, so good
Thank you.
morning.
I appreciate it.
My question is, are any of you aware of what 5 Links is doing with the cannabis industry?
5 links? Please ask.
They started off years ago with telephones. 5 Links, L-I-N-X. You know,
Not familiar with them, no?
they've been around for maybe 30 years. They started off with telephones, but now they are doing CBD, and they come under the name of Oxygen.
Can you put the mic closer?
Yeah, they come under the name of Oxygen, O-X, with a Z, G-E-N, and they build like a pyramid. So you can be a consumer or you can be an entrepreneur.
Okay.
Yeah. Nobody here haven't heard
No.
the 5 Links program? Strange. I had a brochure. I can bring one for you.
Please.
I would
Okay.
like to get further information on that.
Yes, it's I just joined them and I'm having a presentation next week.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's all about CBD. They also have proof that theirs is no additives, no chemicals, pure CBD. It's only made from the hemp, just from hemp.
So it's a product?
Yes.
Yes, okay, got it. Okay, I thought it was an investment vehicle. I
Well,
understand.
it's kind of investing because the public can invest like a pyramid.
Got it, okay, I understand. Well,
So this is another case in point where unless these laws change for banking and you can have access to properly market your business, business will stay at a certain level and suppressed behind everyone else's. So thank you for attending this panel for this discussion for that reason. But again, if we think about what Keeper said, what I've said, what we've said up here, and what you're saying now is that without that access to funding, we might not be able to grow our businesses and take
Exactly.
it to the next level. So thank you for that comment.
Yes. Thank
yeah,
you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good morning, everyone. As a new owner of a new cannabis business and new to this industry in general, a couple questions. Where are these investors? Right? Because our company, definitely our business plan is very strong on corporate social responsibility, social equity, but we have to get there. And starting in this business with the constraints as it relates to banking, what advice can you give for someone new to this who is trying to get it going and up and running and absolutely, completely socially responsible? That is my heartbeat. So any advice on how to get things moving, and especially when you're competing with MSOs. I mean, that's a struggle. They have the money to do everything they want to do. We do not. So, any advice, please? Real stuff. Practical.
Okay.
I'll start off. Let's definitely chat after the panel. I think you bring up a good point, though. Capital is scarce. I've read some research that suggested that there's probably somewhere around $4 billion of capital available, and there's over $30 or $35 billion of capital needed to fund businesses in the U.S. cannabis industry today. So it's very difficult. That $4 billion is concentrated in a small pool of folks. I'm lucky enough to be part of one of the larger funds, and I would love to learn more about your business. And so we should certainly discuss, post the panel and perhaps even help with trying to get access to more capital. But this, again, just drives the point that we need legislation to be able to provide more access to capital, because that gap shouldn't exist. And when that gap does exist, it pushes a certain portion of the people out from accessing that $4 billion. So as far as the business side.
What state? What state are you
Maryland.
located in?
I
Maryland.
remember her from yesterday. Thank you for coming.
So again, I have to drive this point because I was exactly in your same shoes 4 years ago when I started and didn't have capital. And I went through the story earlier, but this problem is still existing today. But what's happening now, let's take a turn for what it looks like today. When your license is demanded to be go into effect. You'll have a date where you have to operationalize or your license will be taken from you. So you will either find someone who will predatorily take your license and pay you pennies on the dollar for that access, or two, you will lose the license and it will go back to the multi-state operators that do have the money to apply in the next round. And so this is why this narrative is so important, because if there are banks available and we can get loans to then operate our own businesses using that type of standard funding, then we would have a chance to be able to be part of this industry. But as today, what you'll see is that you'll go into these environments, even with myself, knocking on everyone's door to see who can help me with monies, and they will say, no, 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 and then you'll have the one yes that will say, we want 95% of your business, we will fund it, we will manage it, we will strip everything from you, and then just give you 5%, and here's your W-2. You are no longer an owner. This is the problem, this is the conversation, this is what needs to change.
I would, of course, a little bit of a shameless plug, encourage you to join MCBA. This is your business community, and you get to network and partner with and be part of a community that includes single operators and organizations like Cresco Labs. So you're going to get mentoring and relationships across the board, and again, be with your people that have been through your struggles, that have become successful despite the same challenges that you're facing now. And you can join us in our advocacy fight as well. Lovely.
So I know you had a question. I see the woman from Ohio here. I hope you came with your question today, because I asked you to come back, so thank you for coming back. Do you mind? I don't know where the microphone is. Oh, I'm so sorry. Do you mind if we come right back? Only because I know her question is related to the question before. Yes, I promise. I'm sorry. Just because I knew that they're together.
Good morning. So I've won 3 licenses for dispensaries in Ohio. One license for cultivation and 1 pending for processing. It's been a 2-year battle. It's been a process because what Ohio has done has stripped the social equity out of it after it was part of the application process. Where I decided to partner with an MSO because at that time, I own a construction company, and that's another business that's difficult for minorities. So when I did my construction business, I decided to do something business savvy and partner with the company, did an acquisition, buy them out. I'm not sure if I'll buy my partners out on this side because that's a lot more money. But when we were first doing the investment, I had $500,000 and I had it in the bank. And my MSO, they're a white company, chose them because I believe in what they stand for, a great company. When my money went into the bank called me back and said, hey, we have to close your account. You need to get here in 5 minutes because we know that it's part of a marijuana business. My partners were savvy enough to understand, and they're attorneys and they do all that. As minorities, we just don't have that same, not even just access to capital, but access to knowledge, how to facilitate it. And this is, I know it's gonna be fruitful, but this has been the most challenging thing that has happened in my life.
Charlie, I feel like your social...
So again, it goes back to sharing the wealth to make sure that there is that preparedness, that interests are aligned. I don't know if maybe your partner could have gone. I won't ask.
I'll tell you afterwards.
Okay. I think this goes to, though, one of the things that everybody in the room has to acknowledge. This industry is difficult just as a whole. It's made further difficult by all of these other things. Anytime you have an emerging industry that's highly regulated, it is going to be challenge after challenge after challenge. So one of the things I would say to everybody is just, you gotta just keep pushing forward. As it goes to the need for these incubator type share of the wealth scenarios, I think this is a very new concept for the space. Everybody, the incumbents even, are realizing that it's more important. I think we might have been ahead of the game on this. This is a rising tide industry. There is no success for any one company unless the program is successful that you operate in. So I think you're going to see more sharing of the wealth, less concern about giving the secret sauce away as this industry continues to develop in 2019 and 2020 and on. As it relates to that specific issue, I would look forward to talking with you.
I just want to add, it's good to have organizations like this help, because what happened is after they had the requirement for 15% minority participation, they took it to the Ohio Supreme Court and stripped it because they said there was no disparity study. So that's the legal games that they continue to play. And organizations, I need organizations like MCA to stand behind folks like us that are doing the right thing, but they just find loopholes to keep us out. So.
Well, and I'll add one thing to that too. I think states are learning, right? Because it was a specific allocation. States is like with Illinois with the adult use law. We learned from the Ohio example.
Oh yeah, because I've been sued by 10.
Florida
Florida
also had that, right? Florida also had that scenario where there was supposed to be a specific number that were allocated, and that got challenged, and it was invalidated. So now that we learn from all of these prior examples, and that's why I think you'll see better structures that focus less on mandated numbers of licenses and more on a holistic approach to make sure that the industry as a whole, all participants that are in that industry are meeting certain thresholds that are active benefits to a broader range, and not just 2 licenses have to go to minority owners. That's not the right solution. Unfortunately, Ohio was probably the last state that was going to try something like that. It's a bit of an antiquated model. I think the modern version of doing this is a much more comprehensive, holistic approach to doing diversity and inclusion the right way.
And
Thank you.
So we have a question right here. Thank you for being patient.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm State Representative Cherish Pryor from Indiana, and there are a couple of things that I think will be helpful to legislators. One, if we have some draft legislation that addresses all the issues that you all have said. We have a disparity study in Indiana, so I think we're ahead of the curve as far as the challenges in the Supreme Court. But I think it would be very helpful for us to have the state legislators that draft legislation so that we know how we can best protect and provide equity for businesses. The other thing with the banking piece, what can we do as state legislators, and I would like some specifics that we can change our laws to make sure that we have minorities that are part of this, because it's very frustrating to me as a legislator to see this business growing and minorities are not taking a part in it, simply because we have a system that has systematically cut us out and we will continue to be left out. I think we're lucky in a way in Indiana that any legislation that gets passed, they probably need the African American legislators. So we're in somewhat a good space, but if we're not aware and don't know what is needed, we will continue to be left out. So if, maybe after this, if you have something that you can give to me with the banking piece, I think is critical as well, so that we can have legislation that we know that we can stand behind, where we have provisions, where we're gonna be a player in this space.
I want to jump in here. So the National Cannabis Roundtable decided to have this panel for that reason. We wanted to bring these issues out. We wanted to discuss them. Our lobbyist, Safira Keywave, she has the answers. We've been working on this very intently. We have a lot of suggestions to make, but as someone who has lived it and continue to see these examples in the audience where we're still continually being shut out. Sometimes it's hard for us to even get access through those doors in the Capitol to have these conversations because we're looked at a stigma point of view where you're cannabis and not healthcare. You're cannabis and not small business. And that's not the case. So I would definitely say we will follow up with those points for you.
Amber?
Thank
Also,
you.
As an MCBA has modeled both local ordinances and model state legislation. I would be happy to connect with you on that. We also, I personally have sat in on calls with state legislators, both privately and then also with their state regulators in helping guide that issue. So we have resources, and there are additional organizations outside of MCBA that have other sweeping tools that you can use. So I would be happy to connect you with those resources and also be a resource as
In MCBA, because I am a board member as well of MCBA, what's important is that you can find a lot of these resources on our website. So if you just go to our website, we do have the model legislation that Amber is referring to, that is on there, that we have collectively came together and said we would support these initiatives.
And then I would love to connect you with the legislators in Illinois that were the champions of the bill, the ones that actually held the pen. And for everybody's benefit, it was 5 women, 2 African American, 1 Latina, and 2 white. That was the group of legislators that made the social equity focused adult use bill pass in Illinois. It was a fantastic effort. And then the other thing, just to plant the seed to here, is we talk about banking and banking reform and access to banking. The other role that banking can play in this too, or more so I should say, the other role that cannabis can play in these community issues specifically, is if state legislators, we tried to get this incorporated in Illinois, but there wasn't enough time to do it. If you can put together a plan that will incentivize the local community banks located in the communities that have been hardest hit by the war on drugs, to incentivize them to bank cannabis businesses, you will then have the benefit, like in Illinois, of $2 billion a year at maturity of cash that is going through these banks located in those communities where those banks can do what banks do, which is lever that money, do small business loans, get that money back out into the communities. So now it's not just cannabis, it's not just rewarding a few licensees that are fortunate enough to get businesses in the space, but you're actually using cannabis money to start daycare centers and grocery stores and anything else that you would want to have happen in those communities. There's an incredible opportunity for cannabis to do more than just be cannabis.
Before we move on to the next question, so to that point, there were a couple of things that I think you said really key. Can anyone talk to the banks that are currently operating? Are you familiar with banks that are currently operating in this space? Because I don't know if anyone is aware there are a small percentage, but if anyone can address that, I think that would be helpful to some of the folks here.
Well, the bigger issue is that we're at the mercy of the bank if they decide to let us use their services, and it's really strictly for deposit only.
Yep.
And with that, they charge us these unbelievable fees. So, for example, for a monthly fee, I pay $2,500. So again, for a small business that is already taxed with the 280E, because we're a legal entity federally, I'm taxed about at the 70% rate, and then you put another fee on top of me for $2,500. It is designed for my failure. And so these are the issues that we're bringing to light here. This is why the conversation is so important. And then the bigger banks that have the ability to leverage, they don't, because they're FDIC insured and they don't want to jeopardize their standing. And so then again, the community that's most impacted, it is the small business, the minority-owned business that has to endure the hardship, and that's why we wind up selling out to big companies or compromising what we otherwise would do with our businesses.
Do you want to add to that, or were you good? Okay.
Well, before I ask my question, I want to piggyback on what my sister, fellow state representative, I'm State Senator Lena Taylor from Wisconsin, and so thank you everyone. So for anyone who is a legislator or wants to go back to tell them, and for your lobbyists in your group, Noble, which is the national organization for Black elected legislative women, as well as NBCSL. NBCSL will have a session in December when we are in Florida about this about cannabis, both hemp and marijuana in. But we had one at Noble, and the Illinois legislators did come and speak. And so we do have the model legislation also on the website of Noble so that we are able to see that. But to piggyback on just the whole conversation about the financial piece, I want to, and I too was not at the beginning part of the session and didn't get to come to your session yesterday. It's just too many good ones, okay? And I also have to go over to the voter one after I, ask this question. But in the hemp industry, I know that everybody wants legalization and everybody wants medical, okay? So in many states, that's not gonna happen. But cannabis has another child. It's called hemp. And hemp is legal in the nation. And the same financial issues that you are talking about marijuana businesses have, hemp businesses are also having. So in our state, we made our license like $100, $200 for processing. I wanted to make it a little bit more, but anyway, we did not. What I'm finding is that I have businesses, they've gone through 7 banks. I have farmers whose banks are saying, oh, you doing cannabis? We cutting all your accounts. Yes. And their other accounts have nothing to do with the cannabis industry. And the number of entities that are doing the work in the area, like at the federal level, I need some legislation so that the FDIC banks won't keep sending my people through this merry-go-round, because it's very difficult to start up again or to say, I can't take anything but cash. Okay, so my question is, do you have some specific suggestions on what we can do, both as state legislators, as individuals, to help move this at the federal level so that banking is not a challenge? And do you have some solutions for me, for my people in Wisconsin who are doing hemp, are not doing marijuana, but want to be able to take debit cards and credit cards and all that kind of stuff?
We've had we've had letters. To those organizations that help connect you to legislators across the nation. So what has been helpful, at least from what we're hearing on the Hill, is we've had state treasurers and other state lawmakers, state AGs, thank you, step up and write letters. And these are really impactful because, again, they are servants of their constituents. So when we hear people that are leading in those states step up and say, hey, we need this and we support this. So we encourage you, if you haven't, to please send a letter to Congress and let them know that you support this and you support it now, and that you need relief for for the people within your state. And coming from somewhere like Wisconsin, it tends to resonate maybe more than coming somewhere like California or Colorado. So that. We've done that. We'll do it again. We'll keep beating that drum. Any other suggestions on solutions?
I don't have solutions for that, and that's been my my problem, because my voice has been mute. But what I can tell you, so Gia and myself are a part of an organization called Women Grow. We represent the largest number of women in the space. And thank you. And we have signature networking events, but we also have webinars, and we share the information of how to process pretty openly. So I'll give you my contact information, but we do have access to a few key players that will give you access to use your debit cards, credit cards for CBD. So that line, and we've been able to talk to major companies.
CBD, let's be clear, right? Hemp seed.
Hemp CBD,
Hemp seed.
yes. So we do have. Yes. And so, but there's ways to get around that as well that we have learned, and we will share that with you. Also, I was gonna pivot to say that there is a network where you can tap into that women have been able to share information how they built their businesses and how to navigate a lot of the challenges that we're facing, period. As you know that, we're the most neglected community, but we see, yes, but most committed. Yes. And so this is what we've been pivoting to make sure that we have a space in this industry. So myself, and she's with Barbara Lee yesterday on the panel, and continues to break barriers through the church, the different mosques,
synagogues.
And so we're definitely doing the work, but we will back you up with that, and we'll see you in Wisconsin.
I love it. And the last thing I want to say is that if your investors are looking for a place where you can grow and where you have water, don't forget Milwaukee.
I love that. So I want to take hold on, I'm just time checking because I know we're very specific about time. I can take 3 more questions, and then I'd like to turn over closing remarks. So please.
Hello, everybody. My name is Antoine Nayland. I own a company in DC called Hidden Leaf DC, and we have a business model that is kind of like the Canadian business model right now, because basically you can order cannabis or CBD products offline, and it could go through the post office, USPS, whatever means of transportation they use in Canada, and it comes right to your doorstep. There's laws that protect the packaging and insurance laws that protect it so that people can't steal from you. And it's insured if it gets lost or something like that. So I have a business model like that in the United States of America. And we're about a $500,000 company. I have created my own finances by myself from the bottom, and I have a solution for your banking, the banking problem. But before I get to that solution really quickly, I think that a lot of people don't understand, like the panelists mentioned before, how hard it is in the cannabis industry. But it was hard before it was legal. And it was always about who has the best. It's always about quality. So I don't care what corporation or even current people that's in the industry, whether they're majority white, Spanish, or we have some minority blacks that's in the industry. If you ain't got the best, you ain't making no money. Straight like that. But my solution to this banking issue is we need to do a national protest.
So wait.
Really quick, I'm almost done. We need to do a national protest, and I don't mean like a protest, you get out there with a picket sign, we can't bank, we got cannabis. No, I mean that if you want to be in the industry, if you have a company, on the same day, unanimously, we all go apply to national banks and credit unions. They're gonna have to do something after that day. It's gonna be on all the news channels. Everybody applied for a bank account today at PNC. They all opening a cannabis account. We gotta do something. That's the only way I feel that you could get the federal movement on that. We gotta protest on this.
Okay.
You gotta let people know that it's a lot of people trying to get into this banking situation.
Ask your question, or
I didn't have a question. I just wanted to give a solution.
You used that as a statement opportunity.
Well, my dean always taught me, don't ask questions, come with solutions.
Okay, and I appreciate that. Thank you. So
I appreciate your passion, and I encourage you to reach out to me at MCBA. We could use some young folks with energy like yours.
Yes.
So I actually have a question, so I guess I'll get an F in your professor's class. But Amber, I would like you to address, I think it's fair to say there's probably a little tension in terms of...
Can you hold the mic closer?
Yeah, I'm sorry. The incrementalism kind of point that we're talking about here. So I'd like you to address that. I think the reality is when it comes to legislation, something that we have to remember is sometimes there is good legislation out there that may not necessarily say this is for African Americans, right? And I think the banking legislation may kind of address that. And I think we have to be kind of careful about that because there is legislation out there that is very kind of clearly saying that we want to help the minority community in this industry, but may not have as good of a chance of getting through the process, right?
Yeah.
So if you could kind of
So
talk
this
about
has
that.
actually been a huge issue on the Hill, where lawmakers are hearing a narrative that the only thing that is good for people of color is legalization. And that is the only thing that should move and the first thing that should move. And any of you, again, familiar with the political realities of federal legislation know that that isn't going to happen anytime too soon. So in the meantime, we have a piece of legislation that is inherently good for people of color because it addresses the number one issue standing between us and participation in this industry, which is access to capital. So that really, again, it has been driving home the point. One of the challenges that we had too is some of the proponents of these bills that are designed to be for people of color were not crafted by people of color. They were not crafted with input from people of color. So you have people going into offices and holding meetings without having ever conferred with minority entrepreneurs or minority business owners in the space and asked them, what is good for you? Is it good for you that we block banking legislation and hold and stand our ground for years until you can get some relief through legalization? Is that good for you? Is that good for your community? So we have been insisting that we become part of the conversation because time and time again, we have other folks telling us what we need and what's good for us. And that's where MCBA, again, has really stepped in and been aggressive in making sure that if decisions are made, they are made with us at the table. And I have really seen our industry partners recognize that. Organizations like NCIA and some of the other trades, Safira over here again, making sure that we are becoming part of that conversation. So again, helping just to educate lawmakers that have been told nothing can happen, and for them they have to deal with politically sensitive issues and be able to approach that. So our job has been to educate them that this is inherently an equity bill, because if you address, it's not sexy, it has to do with banking, it's not sweeping social reform, it's banking. It's not that interesting, but it is actually extraordinarily impactful for our communities.
Okay.
Good morning. My name is Carla Smith. I'm from Little Rock, Arkansas. And Arkansas just recently passed the bill for us to be able to do medical marijuana. First, Amber, I definitely need to join the organization. But Charlie, this is kind of addressed to you as my question. I am not in the growing part, but I'm more in the transportation part of the cash in transit because of the fact that we are not able to do banking with the federal banks, and we are working with credit unions or smaller banking industries, smaller banks,
Sure, state chartered.
Yeah, that will be able to accept the money. So from your perspective and from a banking opportunity, how do you think we can push the envelope for the banks and the Fin Center, Financial Center, the safety for federal government to allow the banks to, or even those banks that are trying to grow in this space to get the capital, because they're running into the issue as well, because they're not financially insured, and for them to get the exposure, besides the fact that, only cannabis bank, they can only manage the money from cannabis. How can we push that envelope to help those type of banks, or either to get the FDIC to approve some of this? What can we do,
Safe Act.
legislative
Safe
or not?
Act, Safe Act, Safe Act. Safe Act, the Safe Act is what those banks need. It's what, all of these banks I think that we're talking about are FDIC insured. That's not the issue. It's the federal charter, or definitely the publicly traded. So state chartered banks have shown historically that they are the first and really the only ones that are willing to evaluate this. State legislators and definitely state treasurers can help incentivize those state chartered banks to want to get more involved, but the answer is the SAFE Act. And that's why even the state legislators that are here today, have your constituents push the state's senators and congresspeople in D.C. that are representing their interests here, push them to pass the SAFE Act. That's what will get those banks in particular. I think at that point, it normalizes this space, and cannabis. As soon as cannabis becomes more of a normalized industry, of course, with all of these responsibilities attached to it, that's when these opportunities start becoming real realities.
Thank you. And we talked about that yesterday in terms of normalization. The more we begin to normalize and remove the stigma, I think that this will help in terms of moving forward. Yes, sir.
Yes, as you were just talking about mobilization. And first of all, I'd like to thank the panel and thank you all for doing such a wonderful job in informing us. And I would like to get your business cards and network with you. I'm a retired educator from Miami, Florida. I moved back home. I'm now a grower in the state of Kentucky. And I looked on the 1870 census, and I have one of my ancestors who was working in hemp back then. And I'm more interested in the incubator part of it, where that we teach kids about growing hemp. And, as the young brother was saying about on the street selling, there used to be a saying, don't get high on your own supply. We need to teach them less about getting high and more about the supply. And my question, so that I'd like to speak with you later so that I don't take up too much time, but my question is, how do we network with one another to be able to work on a national level? Because we have Ohio here, we have Kentucky, Pennsylvania, but when we come up with legislation and laws and strategies so that we are a little less concerned, and we need to be concerned about color, but just a little less. In our group, I would rather look at us as not necessarily black and white, but as green, a green movement, so that if we can't get financed by the bank, if you can get $60,000 for an acre or $600,000 for 10 acres, if we could mobilize a labor group and train them. Picking weeds out of weed is our main problem, but if we could tackle those problems such as the labor force and also to be able to work with one another on a national level, how can we best do that?
One point that I thought you were actually going another way, but I just wanted to add to that. So to this brother's point, he's absolutely right in terms of like education. And just to your point, we do need to bring our children into this space in terms of understanding what those opportunities are. So education is a big component to it. So I thought that that's where you were going. I was like, yes, we do need to educate our children. But I'll turn that over to the panelists to respond.
Definitely. So I remember 3 years ago when we applied to be here, we weren't able to acquire this space, and through my relationship with Howard University, we were able to have a panel discussion just like this, talking about the needs and the resources necessary for minorities in cannabis. Last year was the first year that we were actually able to hold a panel here, and now what I'm hoping from this is now we can get a committee. If we can get the Congressional Black Caucus to acknowledge that there is a need to have this conversation amongst us, which I think we have clearly demonstrated, it's time now to be able to come together and collectively with those that are here on the panel and many more that are willing to contribute to this conversation, to organize ourselves so that yet we can now find out what we can do to help our legislators, to help the business person, to help our communities, to help education. So I think that's the next step. And you know, as a African-American woman, I was bold enough to do it the first time. I think it's time we go back to the Congressional Black Caucus and do it again.
We have some of the largest labor organizations that are actually part of our federal movement here. And so, I encourage you to reach out to national organizations like ours. And again, the young lady actually sitting at the end of your row is a representative from another national organization. So we have resources for you and can connect you. If we can't provide them, we can connect you with people that can.
So I'm going to go back on my word. We're going to take 2 more questions, just because I understand how important this is. And this, unfortunately, isn't a topic that's often discussed in the broader sense. So where's the next? There you go. Sorry.
All right. Hello, my name is Sheena Foster, and I'm an urban farmer and a consumer. My question is related to financing businesses that create spaces for people to smoke legally. For one, I feel like the legalization of marijuana comes with a double-edged sword, because while people are, while it's being decriminalized, the users of marijuana mostly occupy housing that's federally funded. We live in apartment buildings that receive low-income tax credits, so it doesn't matter if you are not a Section 8 voucher holder, you can live in a luxury apartment and can't smoke, because for one, I got a notice, 2 of them. So I'm thinking about ways of creating a safe space for people to go and smoke, and so I'm looking at that as a business model, and so I'm wondering, is that something that banks would support? For one, it's not the growing of marijuana, but it's a space for people to be able to go and smoke. And then 2, do you see any synergy between potential partnerships between maybe hospitals, where one could partner with a hospital that is using medical marijuana, and perhaps I can go in with a partner to get a facility, and the bank would potentially fund that? And the last question is there any room for CRA to help the Community Reinvestment Act to fund small businesses that are within the space of trying to provide a safe space for those to smoke, so that we don't see evictions on the rise and people being displaced from their homes while people are coming out from being incarcerated?
My God, I want to answer so many of those questions myself.
I'm going to jump in, though, Gia.
Yeah, no, right. Look,
I'm going to tell you that Eleanor Holmes Norton has been a champion with looking at federally subsidized housing and how that mostly minority populations have been removed from their housing because he said marijuana is an illegal and illicit drug. So she has been very, very vocal about that, because as you know, that housing, it affects our whole livelihood. So that's the first thing on the federal level. But on your state level, the state level and the legislation there, so you need to change it federally, 1. Then you have to go to the state level. Like, for example, Maryland, D.C., a lot of East Coast legislation doesn't allow for consumption in a public place or even in a private facility. Well, yes, exactly. And so the council in DC would have to change that through policy in order to make it legal to do so. So then that's the second challenge, but yet a very mindful and viable business model. And so after you can get through 1 and 2 hurdles, then you go to the third one, which is that, can I actually operate the facility and to make it lucrative so you can have a return on your investment? Again, that's another challenge while we're speaking here, is that you might have an ideal business plan, can get through loop A and B, but when you come to C and you don't have any monies or resources to do it, that's where we're stumped again. So this is how the system has been working against us. So what we're trying to do is start here. Okay, let's give us access to capital, because then with capital, we can start to change those other narratives.
I would love to address the last part of your question because as a policy attorney by trade, I have looked to the CRA and there is so much within that act that can be helpful to us. So I love that you brought it up. I have some other partners in the room that share my opinion. It actually I used it as the foundation for an ordinance that we got passed in the city of Los Angeles, but then it got through the city council, but then unfortunately had some pushback from industry. And now again, as I think Charlie said, there has been a shift, a true shift in the last, maybe kind of starting in the beginning of the year, where you see a true return to these social justice and these equity principles, and you have companies like Cresco really stepping out front. You have organizations that represent multiple, big multi-state operators stepping up and creating equity language. Again, this is changing. I absolutely do. And the CRA is actually a great model. So I encourage you to get together with the folks, some of the folks in this room, because if you have insights on that, we would love to share that because it is the Community Reinvestment Act is a piece of banking, an old piece of banking regulation that legislation that helps to incentivize banks to lend money and to do the right thing in communities. So a lot of that can actually be used to help shape our community reinvestment programs within the cannabis industry. So it's a piece of legislation that we've looked at, some of your advocates have been looking at, and I love that you brought it up.
So I know we have 3 questions. Here's what I'm going to ask. If you can ask yours, pass the mic to him while we're answering. And then the last question over here. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Tony Green. I'm a cannabis attorney here in DC. And I'm wondering if discussions are being had about peer-to-peer banking or crowdfunding.
There's a lot of discussion, there's just not a lot of execution about that, and organizing ourselves to be in a position to truly be able to move forward with those efforts. But I think that's the next step we need to definitely take forward.
And you guys realize that this is an industry that is only just evolving. So many of us are coming into this without any answers. We're creating the answers as we're building. Unfortunately, if you're not trying to replicate mistakes that have been made in other industries, then you have to somewhat start over or address it from a different perspective. So that's just what I wanted to add to that. Yes, sir.
I just want to start by saying that I'm a New Yorker, right? Born and raised, New York City. So
Brooklyn.
all right. So any more New Yorkers in here? Okay. So my thing is, right, in a city where you can potentially walk around the corner and get what you need from 5 different people, or you can walk across the street and. Do I really need it? Can anyone hear me?
Yes. They can't.
All right. So potentially, when you can walk around the corner and get what you want from other people, I understand this is about investment, and there's 3 things that stood out to me in this conversation. 1 was capital, 2 was regulation, and then 3 was the incubator program. Now, we discussed that the black community or minority community doesn't have enough capital to fund an operation this large, right? But you also said once we get through the door, we could potentially regulate it out the door or regulate it out of business, right? And the incubator program, which is new to me, how does that safeguard a $10 million investment as well as provide the education and things like that? Because coming from New York, it sounds like a fairy tale. We had a minor victory with the carry law. You can carry like an ounce better, but it's like, when you go on to Malik and Julio, you're not thinking about social equity and what you're going to do for the supermarket, So we're trying to figure out in New York in the street, like, how can we go about this the right way?
Okay, so first of all, I'm from Brooklyn. I rep Brooklyn all day. Okay. That said, please speak to me after. I'm pretty involved in New York and what's happening in New York State, and I'd love to introduce you to some organizations there that are doing a lot of the work.
So I'll be real brief with it too. So 2 points. One, you need opportunities that don't cost $10 million to do. Right? So that's part of that, being part of that legislative process, to make sure that they create opportunities that aren't giant, unattainable kind of things for the vast majority of people. You need small business opportunities. So not only on the retail side, but also potentially on craft growing, processing, infusion licenses, where you could just have a small kitchen, right? So you need the opportunities that are viable small businesses. And then the incubator program, the number one thing that incubator program can do is it could teach people that aren't used to a regulated structure how to participate in a regulated structure. Every one of these cannabis laws that's going to be created going forward is going to include seed to sale tracking systems, yes. Right? Because you have to think about all the stakeholders sitting at the table, which includes law enforcement. So if they want to be able to get the law enforcement sponsor for them to go, okay, we're okay with this legalization effort, it's going to come with these boundaries, these guidelines, these tracking systems, and the incubator program will help people be prepared. It's not rocket science. It's a new way of thinking about doing a highly regulated, controlled industry. And it's there. It's the knowledge that we have. We're more than happy to. I want to participate in a successful program, not a program that is looked at as like a wink, wink, nod, nod, sort of a fake legalized program where it's all going. I want to participate in a healthy, robust, and regulated, but not overly regulated market that could be successful for a lot of people.
As far as regulations are concerned, that is something that can absolutely, I come from actually the natural products, kind of anything that you'd see sold in Whole Foods. That's the industries that I come from. And because of the extraordinary level of regulation, believe it or not, those products are highly regulated. Small businesses and then in turn businesses of color tend to really struggle because compliance is highly complex. You have manufacturing standards, you have packaging, you have marketing, all of these things that become pitfalls for small business. So we are collectively starting to look at what our regulatory framework will look like. And I highly encourage you to reach out to the folks within industry that are trying to take a look at what that looks like and make sure that your voice is heard so that we can understand what your challenges are and we make sure that as we're creating this framework that it works for all of our small businesses and all of our unique business models that we've created.
Last question.
Yes, really, excuse me, good morning. When listening to, I believe it was Ms. Taylor from Wisconsin, she was talking about how they can get the banking community to participate, especially around the cash movement. When applying for our license, we looked here in Maryland, in the DMV area, we looked at the lower served counties in Maryland, Wycomico, Eastern Shore. I'm sure you guys are aware of those areas where a lot of go. So we applied and we put that into our license and showed how we were going to bring an economic boom to those communities. And that put pressure on the local legislators to also speak to the banks on our behalf. It's still been a big struggle, but we found that that's moved the needle a little bit. And because these legislators, of course, want to have this economic boom in their community, and not saying that our business is bringing thousands of jobs, but it's bringing more jobs than what they have. And so we've used that model to push our banking needs, not to where they should be or where we really need them to be yet, but it's getting there. So I would suggest that if you are applying for license or you have one and you have some leeway in where you can grow, process, and put your business, and not necessarily a dispensary business is not always great there, but the processing, growing business side of it, that creates more jobs in that community would be the way to go. So it's worked for us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, does anyone, okay. So what I'd like to do, thank you so much. We've run over our time. I'm surprised they haven't knocked on the door yet. But I don't know about you, but I really enjoyed this conversation. Each of you, could you provide us with some kind of contact resource where they can follow up with you if you'd like? And also just a closing remark, brief closing remarks as we close the session out.
Sure.
I'll start with you, Gerald.
Sure.
Yes.
So Jarrell at puravitafunds.com. I've heard some pretty interesting business models, and I would love to connect with the folks in here, Ohio, locally, to talk about your businesses and anybody that you may know that is looking into this space and wants some feedback and put me in a position that I can help them get access to the capital today. We don't have to wait until SAFE happens. We can start now. And so with that, I just want to thank everybody for coming today. I think this certainly helps push the conversation forward. It's been great to just meet more people in the industry and kind of see sort of the motivation in all the different businesses. And so I won't be redundant. I think it's very clear that we need this.
Yes.
So let's just continue the conversation, ask the right questions and get the right answers.
Thank you. Dr. Shonda?
You can follow me on social media, Dr. Shonda_Macias. Emails, Shonda@womengrow.com. And we are in DuPont Circle, so National Holistic Healing Center. If you need any questions or concerns, our team is there for you. So, and I'd like to make a special shout out to Dr. Janice Snowden. Can you stand up? She's from Southern University, the first historically black college and university to embark on medical cannabis program. So thank you, Jana, for all your efforts, and I love being your partner.
My name is Amber Littlejohn. You can reach me at amber@minoritycannabis.org. I would just, in closing, I would say we have a piece of legislation right now that is on the table, the Safe Banking Act. We encourage you to reach out, make a phone call, send an email, connect with your legislators, because this is an issue. As you've heard the stories that have come from this panel and around this room, and even some of the stories that we heard yesterday with the panels, this is an equity issue. And I encourage you, do not let anybody co-opt our message to tell us that we don't need this fix now. You need to wait until we can do this the way that we want to do this. You need to wait, because our community, our business community, and our community really don't have that kind of time. So I encourage you to push back against that message and to reach out to your legislators to ensure that we get that floor vote and we get this piece of legislation passed and get relief and access to this industry to our communities.
Thank you. Charlie?
Again, Charlie Bachtel with Cresco Labs. I would echo everything that my colleagues up here have said so far in closing. I'd encourage everybody in this room to think about cannabis holistically. It's very important to understand all of the stakeholders that are sitting at the table. So it's easy to look at it from your perspective, look at it from all of the perspectives, and then try and offer solutions, right, to everybody's concerns that are sitting at that table. That's how legislation gets passed. So, and we also have, I have other members of my organization that are here today. Barrington Rutherford over there, who's actually the lead of the SEED program. John Sullivan, who's government affairs lead for Cresco. So if you have any questions related specifically to those two aspects, these guys will be around for a while. Thank you.
And I'm Gia Marone, president of Women Grow. This panel has been brought to you by us, and I'd also like to thank the National Cannabis Roundtable for supporting and sponsoring us. If you'd like to reach me, my name is Gia, that's GIA@womengrow.com, or you can follow me on social media. I want to thank our esteemed panelists. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I thank you all for your questions. Not only do we keep this conversation going, but to Amber's point, to Charlie's point, and Dr. Shonda and Gerald, that we actually need to let our voices be heard. Like, we really have got to get behind this. Safe banking is important. It's what's going to make the difference to us all. Thank you.